The drunk bullies slammed Clara onto a table, laughing, recording, certain no one would stop them. Then the bar went silent. The temperature dropped, and every man realized the nightmare walking toward them wore a black shirt and a promise. No one touches what's his and lives to boast about it. But when the ringleader gasped that they'd been sent to hurt her, Virgilio's fury turned surgical, because who the hell would dare test the one monster who swore he'd never fail again? If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. El Puente Bar was a kingdom of unspoken rules. A sprawling room under the relentless glow of neon signs, red, blue, green, that cast everything in an otherworldly haze. The air was thick with conflicting scents. Stale cigarette smoke clinging to the walls, cheap whiskey mixed with even cheaper cologne, grease from the kitchen frying empanadas, and underneath it all, the metallic tang of old violence that never quite washed away. The floor was a map of territories. The regulars claimed the bar counter, their backs to the room, eyes always watching through the mirror. The dealers occupied the corner booths, conducting business in Spanish and hushed Portuguese. The drifters scattered near the exits, ready to vanish at the first sign of trouble. And in the back, behind a door marked private, was the heart of it all. That's where Virgilio Marcelo conducted his real business. Clara Reyes had been working at El Puente for exactly 3 days. 3 days of keeping her head down, memorizing orders, avoiding eye contact. 3 days of pretending the group of young men in the corner weren't watching her like wolves circling prey. 3 days of telling herself she just needed to survive one more shift, make enough money to disappear again if necessary. Her hands trembled as she carried drinks across the sticky floor. Her dark hair was pinned back in a tight bun that pulled at her scalp. Her uniform black vest over a white button-down, black slacks hung slightly loose on her small frame. She'd lost weight running from her past. Fear had a way of stealing appetite. The 5 men had started with comments, whistles, requests for her to smile more. Beautiful. When she ignored them, they escalated, blocking her path, grabbing her wrist when she delivered drinks, laughing when she pulled away. Tonight, they'd been drinking since 7. It was now past midnight. "Hey, waitress." The one in the gray shirt, the ringleader, slammed his empty glass on the table. "We need more beer. And this time, don't take so long." Clara nodded, not making eye contact. "Right away. Look at me when I'm talking to you." She looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, predatory. The others laughed, one in a black t-shirt, another with visible tattoos on his neck, 2 more in casual clothes that reeked of expensive cologne and cheap morals. "Better," Gray Shirt said, grinning. "You got a boyfriend, sweetheart?" I'll get your drinks." Clara turned away. A hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Hard. "I asked you a question." The bar had gone quieter. Not silent, never silent in El Puente, but the kind of quiet where everyone's peripheral awareness sharpened, where regulars started calculating exit routes. "Please," Clara whispered, "let me go." "Not until you answer." She tried to pull away. His grip tightened, nails digging into her skin. The others stood up, circling around her like a pack closing in. "Come on, don't be rude," the one in black said, running a finger down her arm. "We just want to get to know you." Clara's breathing quickened. Her vision tunneled. This felt too familiar, the circle of men, the hands, the laughter that turned human sounds into something predatory. "I said let go." Gray Shirt shoved her backward. She stumbled into the one with neck tattoos, who pushed her forward again. They were playing with her, passing her between them like a toy. "Stop, please." "Please?" Gray Shirt mocked her accent. "Where you from, anyway? You one of those illegals?" The bartender reached for the phone behind the counter. A regular grabbed his wrist, shook his head slowly. "Don't. The boss will handle it." But Virgilio Marcelo was in his office, behind closed doors, in a meeting that nobody interrupted. Clara tried to run. Gray Shirt caught her by the vest, yanked her back so hard the fabric tore slightly. She cried out, a sound of genuine fear that cut through the music, through the conversations, through every pretense of normalcy. "Where you think you're going?" And then he did it. He grabbed her with both hands, one fist bunching her vest, the other gripping her arm, lifted her small body off the ground, and with a roar of drunken triumph, threw her onto the nearest table. Wood cracked. Glasses exploded. Beer cascaded across her face and uniform. Clara landed hard, chest first, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Her head bounced off the table. Stars burst behind her eyes. Liquid soaked through her clothes, cold, reeking of alcohol and humiliation. She tried to breathe and couldn't. Tried to move and couldn't. The men laughed. Someone raised a phone to record. And then the temperature dropped. Everyone felt it at once, that primal recognition of a predator entering the room. Through the haze of neon lights and cigarette smoke, a shadow moved. Larger, colder, deadlier. Virgilio Marcello stood there. Black shirt, tattooed arms, expression carved from stone. His dark eyes locked on Clara, lying broken on the table, then moved to the hands that had thrown her there. Nobody breathed. Everyone in El Puente Bar felt the same truth at the exact same moment. Their nightmare had just begun. If moments like this make your heart drop, don't just watch silently. Hit subscribe now. Stories like this deserve witnesses, not bystanders. 3 weeks earlier, Clara Reyes had been a different person. Not in name, not in appearance, but in the small, fragile thing called hope. That flickering belief that tomorrow might be safer than today, that running might eventually lead to rest instead of just more running. She'd been wrong about that too. The town she fled from didn't have a name worth remembering. Just another dusty collection of buildings along the Mexican border where cartel law superseded any government pretense. Where girls like Clara learned early that survival meant invisibility, and invisibility meant becoming so small you barely cast a shadow. Her mother had died when Clara was 16. Cancer, they said. But Clara knew the truth: stress could kill just as surely as bullets. Stress from the debt her father accumulated gambling with men who didn't accept "I'll pay you back" as currency. When her father disappeared 2 years later, swallowed by the desert or the cartel, it didn't matter which. The debt transferred to Clara like inherited sin. $15,000. She had nothing. No family. No skills beyond waitressing at the local cantina. No way to pay except the way they always made young women pay. So she ran. Across the border with nothing but the clothes on her back, a fake ID that cost her last $200, and a prayer to a god she'd stopped believing in somewhere around her mother's funeral. She'd been running for 8 months when she found El Puente Bar. Actually, it found her. Clara had been sleeping in a women's shelter 3 blocks away, working day shifts at a laundromat for cash under the table. The money wasn't enough. It was never enough. She was drowning in slow motion, sinking one day at a time toward the moment when her past would catch up. She'd walked past El Puente dozens of times, never went in. Bars meant men. Men meant danger. Danger meant the kind of attention that got girls like her sent back across the border in pieces. But on a Tuesday night, desperate and down to her last $11, she saw the sign in the window: "Waiters wanted. Inquire within." Clara stood outside for 20 minutes, trying to convince her feet to move. The neon lights buzzed overhead, red and blue, casting the wet pavement in colors that looked like warning signals. She could see shadows moving inside, hear voices, smell cigarette smoke drifting through the cracked door. Just one more job, she told herself. Make enough to disappear again. Keep moving. She pushed the door open. The bar was exactly what she expected. Dark, smoky, dangerous. Men occupied every corner, some playing cards, others drinking in silence, a few conducting conversations that stopped the moment she entered. Eyes tracked her movement across the floor. Assessed, calculated, dismissed. The bartender, an older man with gray stubble and tired eyes, looked her up and down. "Help you?" "The sign," Clara said quietly, pointing outside. "Waitress position? You got experience?" 3 years. Cantina work. He grunted, unimpressed. "Can you handle drunk assholes?" Clara thought about the men back home. The hands, the comments, the constant negotiation between submission and resistance. "Yes." "When can you start?" "Tonight." That's when the office door opened. Clara didn't know who Virgilio Marcello was. Didn't recognize the name when the bartender's face went carefully neutral. Didn't understand why the entire bar seemed to recalibrate its breathing when the man in the black shirt stepped out. She just saw him. Tall, muscular, tattooed arms visible beneath rolled sleeves. Dark eyes that swept the room with the lazy confidence of someone who owned everything he looked at. His gaze landed on Clara. Stopped. Something shifted in his expression, something too fast to name but heavy enough to feel. "She applying for the position?" Virgilio asked the bartender, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "Yes, boss. Says she's got experience." Virgilio walked closer. Clara's instinct screamed to run, but her desperation kept her rooted. Up close, she could see the details. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the silver chain around his neck, the way his jaw clenched like he was perpetually holding back violence. "What's your name?" His voice was surprisingly quiet. controlled. Clara Reyes. Where you from, Clara Reyes? She hesitated. Lies were safer, but something about his directness demanded truth. South, near the border. You running from something? Her breath caught. I just need work. Virgilio studied her for a long moment. Not the way the other men had, not with hunger or calculation. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. You got somewhere to stay? The shelter on Maple Street. He nodded slowly, jaw working like he was making a decision that mattered more than hiring a waitress should. You're hired. 7 to close, 5 nights a week. Cash, paid weekly. You show up on time, work hard, keep your head down. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely her knees nearly buckled. Thank you so much. One more thing. Virgilio's voice dropped lower, harder. You see trouble in here, you come get me. You feel unsafe, you come get me. Anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you problems, you tell me immediately. Understood? Clara nodded, confused by the intensity. I need to hear you say it. I understand. Good. You're under my protection now. Nobody touches what's mine. Clara didn't understand what he meant by mine. Didn't understand the weight those words carried in El Puente Bar. Didn't understand that Virgilio Marcelo had just drawn a line around her that everyone else in the district would recognize and respect. She just whispered, I just need to survive. Just one more night. She had no idea that Virgilio Marcelo was making the exact same promise, but for entirely different reasons. Virgilio Marcelo learned about death when he was 9 years old. Not the sanitized version they taught in school, the circle of life, the peaceful passing, the comforting lies adults told children. Real death, the kind that left stains on concrete and nightmares that never faded. His father ran protection rackets in the district. His mother pretended not to notice the blood on his shirts. And his little sister Isabella, 3 years younger, gap-toothed and fearless, thought their father was a hero. Virgilio knew better. He watched his father break men's fingers for late payments. Watched him burn down a store that refused to pay. Watched the careful dance between violence and business, where brutality was currency and fear was the only contract that mattered. By 15, Virgilio was working collections. By 18, he was running his own crew. By 25, he'd inherited the family business when his father took 3 bullets outside a warehouse in a deal gone wrong. The Marcelo name became synonymous with 2 things, power and consequences. Cross them, and you disappeared. Challenge them, and you learned why fear was a survival mechanism. But protect what was theirs, family, territory, money, and the Marcelo family became an impenetrable wall between you and everyone who wanted to hurt you. Virgilio built his empire on that simple principle. Loyalty earned protection. Betrayal earned burial. El Puente Bar became his headquarters 7 years ago. Not because it was profitable, though it was, but because it was neutral ground. A place where deals could be made, debts could be settled, and business could be conducted without the performance required in the streets. The regulars knew the rules. The staff knew to stay silent. And everyone knew that the man in the black shirt sitting in the back office was the reason their neighborhood functioned at all. But Virgilio Marcelo carried a wound that never healed. Her name was Isabella, 22 years old, studying to be a nurse, still gap-toothed when she smiled, still fearless in ways that terrified him. She worked night shifts at the community clinic, helping people who couldn't afford real hospitals. Virgilio had warned her, told her the clinic was in disputed territory, told her that working late made her vulnerable, told her to let him assign protection. She'd laughed, kissed his cheek, and said, Virgilio, not everyone needs to live in your dark world. Some of us still believe in helping people. He got the call at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. Isabella had been walking to her car after her shift. 3 men, low-level runners from a rival operation, cornered her in the parking lot. They knew whose sister she was. That's exactly why they targeted her. They wanted to send a message to Virgilio Marcelo. Your protection has limits. Your power has cracks. Your family bleeds like everyone else. By the time Virgilio arrived, the ambulance was already there. Isabella lay on the asphalt, her white nursing scrubs torn and bloodied, her face swollen from where they'd beaten her. She was breathing barely, but something essential had been shattered in her eyes. She looked at him and whispered, "Where were you?" 3 words. A question that became an accusation. A wound that would never close. Isabella survived physically. The broken ribs healed. The bruises faded. But she moved away 3 months later across the country, to a city where the Marcelo name meant nothing, where she could rebuild herself far from her brother's shadow. She never came back, never called. And in the 7 years since, Virgilio had received exactly one message from her. I forgive you, but I can't be near you. Your world destroys everything it touches. That night created the Virgilio Marcello everyone feared. The 3 men who attacked Isabella disappeared. Not quickly, not mercifully. Virgilio made sure their last hours taught them what real suffering meant. He made sure every criminal in the district understood the new rule. Family was untouchable, and violating that rule meant experiencing pain that made death look like kindness. But he couldn't undo what happened. Couldn't rewind time. Couldn't be in that parking lot when Isabella needed him. The failure hollowed him out, carved away everything soft until only the essential machinery of survival remained. Violence, strategy, protection. He swore 2 things after Isabella left. First, that he would never again fail to protect someone under his care. Second, that he would never again allow emotional attachment to cloud his judgment. For 7 years, he kept both promises. El Puente Bar ran smoothly. His operations expanded. His reputation grew. He became the monster his father had trained him to be: efficient, brutal, untouchable. Until Clara Reyes walked through his door. She stood in his bar on a Tuesday night, small, exhausted, desperate, and something about her shattered his carefully constructed armor. The way she held herself, perpetually braced for impact. The way her eyes tracked exits before looking at faces. The way she said, "I just need work," with the particular desperation of someone who'd already lost everything. She reminded him of Isabella. Not in appearance, Clara was Latina, where Isabella had been Italian. Not in personality, Clara was quiet, where Isabella had been bold. But in vulnerability. In the specific fragility of someone trying to survive in a world designed to break them. Virgilio hired her on the spot. Told himself it was just good business, the bar needed help. Told himself it didn't matter who she was or where she came from. Told himself he wasn't trying to rewrite history or save someone he'd already failed. But when he said, "You're under my protection now," he meant it with every atom of his being. He assigned her the safest shifts, kept watch when she worked, made sure every regular in the bar understood she was off limits. For 3 days, everything was fine. Then the 5 young men started coming in, newcomers, outsiders who didn't know the rules, who saw a pretty waitress and thought she was available, who mistook Virgilio's absence from the floor as permission. They harassed her, touched her, cornered her. And Virgilio, buried in his office managing shipments and negotiations, didn't notice. Not until the sound reached through the walls. Not the normal sounds of the bar, laughter, music, conversation. Something else. Something that bypassed his conscious mind and went straight to the oldest, darkest part of his brain. The sound of someone crying for help. The sound of Clara hitting the table. The sound of history repeating itself. Virgilio stood in his office, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white, jaw locked so hard his teeth ground together. Not again. Something primal screamed inside him. Never again. He walked toward the door, and the monster Isabella feared stepped into the light. Time moved differently in moments of violence. Clara Reyes lay sprawled across the table, beer soaking through her uniform, glass shards glittering in her hair like broken stars. Her chest heaved with panicked breaths that wouldn't come properly. The impact had driven the air from her lungs, left her gasping like a fish drowning in open air. Pain bloomed across her ribs where she'd hit the table's edge. Her cheek throbbed where it had bounced off the wood. But worse than the physical pain was the other kind, the soul-deep humiliation of being thrown like garbage while people watched and did nothing. Above her, the 5 men laughed. The sound echoed in her ringing ears, distorted and monstrous. "Look at her!" Grayshirt howled, slapping the table beside her head. "Thought she was too good to talk to us." The one in black grabbed her wrist, pinning it to the table. "Maybe she needs another lesson in manners." Clara tried to speak, to beg, to scream, but her voice came out as a broken whimper. Her vision blurred with tears. This was how it ended, she thought. This was how it always ended for girls like her. Hurt, humiliated. Ira said. The bartender's hand hovered over the phone. A regular, the old man who always sat at the corner of the bar, touched his wrist gently, shook his head, mouthed 2 words. He knows. Because everyone in El Puente Bar understood something the 5 bullies didn't. The walls had ears. The floorboards carried vibrations. And Virgilio Marcello always knew what happened in his territory. In his office, Virgilio heard Clara's cry cut through the walls like a blade through silk. For one frozen second, he stood perfectly still. Documents scattered across his desk. A half-finished drink sweating condensation onto wood. The phone still warm from the call he'd just finished. Then the sound registered fully, not just noise, but meaning. Not just a cry, but her cry. Clara's voice, breaking on a sob that carried the specific frequency of genuine terror. The documents didn't matter anymore. The deal didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the girl he'd promised to protect, and the promise he'd failed once before. His jaw locked, his fists clenched. His eyes went cold and dead. The monster woke up. Virgilio moved to the door with lethal purpose. No rush, no panic. Just the calm, measured stride of a predator who'd already calculated how this would end. He opened the door, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Everyone felt it simultaneously, that primal recognition of danger. The instinct that made ancient humans fear the dark because something with bigger teeth lived there. The bar's ambient noise conversations, laughter, clinking glasses, died instantly. Not slowly, not gradually. Like someone had pressed mute on existence itself. Virgilio stepped into the main room. The neon lights cast his shadow long and dark across the floor, stretching toward the table where Clara lay broken and sobbing. His tattooed arms were visible beneath his rolled sleeves, muscles tense and coiled. His black shirt seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His expression was carved from stone. No anger, no rage, just cold, infinite calculation. But his eyes burned with something far worse than fury. They held the particular darkness of a man who'd already decided people were going to suffer and was simply working out the logistics. He walked past the bar counter, past the frozen regulars, past the couple in the booth who'd pressed themselves against the wall like they could disappear into the vinyl. His footsteps echoed on the linoleum, steady, inevitable, the soundtrack to someone's nightmare beginning. The 5 bullies didn't notice at first. They were too busy laughing, too focused on Clara's tears, too drunk on power and cheap beer to recognize the shift in atmospheric pressure. Gray Shirt grabbed a glass, held it over Clara's face. "Maybe we should take your hands off her." The voice wasn't loud. Virgilio didn't shout, didn't raise his voice above a conversational tone. But the words carried weight that made grown men flinch, each syllable carefully measured, stripped of emotion, delivered with the flat certainty of someone stating absolute fact. The 5 men turned. That's when they saw him. Virgilio Marcello stood 3 feet away, hands loose at his sides, stance deceptively casual. But every person in that bar who knew him recognized the signs. The slight tilt of his head, the way his jaw worked like he was physically restraining himself, the absolute stillness that preceded explosive violence. Gray Shirt laughed nervously. "Hey man, we're just having fun. I won't repeat myself." The one in black, either braver or stupider than his friends, straightened up, still gripping Clara's wrist. "Or what, old man? You gonna—" Virgilio moved. Not like a man, like a weapon released from restraint. He closed the distance in one fluid step, his right hand shooting out to grip the black-shirted bully's wrist, the one pinning Clara. The crack of bone breaking was audible across the entire bar. The bully's scream was cut short when Virgilio's left hand shot to his throat, squeezing just hard enough to silence him without crushing his windpipe. "Yet," I said. Virgilio's voice remained conversational, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Take your hands off her." He released the man, who collapsed, gasping and cradling his shattered wrist. The other 4 rushed him simultaneously. It was the stupidest decision they'd ever made. Virgilio's elbow caught the first one in the solar plexus, doubling him over. His knee came up, connecting with the man's face with a crunch of cartilage. Blood sprayed. He pivoted, catching Gray Shirt's wild punch, redirecting it so the man's momentum carried him face first into a bar stool. Wood splintered. Gray Shirt went down hard. The one with neck tattoos grabbed a beer bottle, swung it at Virgilio's head. Virgilio caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it until the man's own momentum forced him to his knees, then drove his fist into the man's kidney. Once. Twice. The bottle shattered on the floor. The 5th tried to run. Virgilio caught him by the collar, dragged him back like he weighed nothing, and threw him across the nearest table, exactly like they'd done to Clara. The symmetry was deliberate. 15 seconds. That's all it took for 5 men to become broken, bleeding piles of regret on El Puente's sticky floor. Virgilio stood over them, breathing steady, not even winded. His knuckles were bleeding. His shirt had blood on it, not his. His tattooed arms flexed as he rolled his shoulders, loosening muscles that had just done brutal work. Then he turned to Clara. She was still on the table, sobbing, shaking, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. Virgilio's expression softened not completely, but enough. He approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Clara, it's over. You're safe." She looked up at him with eyes that held too much trauma, too much history, too much fear to simply vanish because he said so. but she saw something in his face that made her believe him anyway. He extended his hand. "Let me help you up." Clara's hand trembled as she reached for Virgilio's. His grip was surprisingly gentle, calloused, warm, steady as he helped her sit up. Beer dripped from her hair, glass shards fell from her uniform, and her entire body shook with adrenaline crash. The table beneath her was destroyed. Wood cracked down the middle, liquid pooling in the split. Behind Virgilio, the 5 men groaned on the floor. Gray Shirt clutched his face, blood seeping between his fingers. Black Shirt cradled his shattered wrist, whimpering. The others lay in various states of consciousness, learning what regret tasted like. "Can you stand?" Virgilio asked quietly. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He helped her off the table, keeping one hand on her elbow to steady her. She swayed, dizzy from impact and shock. That's when Gray Shirt made his final mistake. "You're dead," he spat through broken teeth, struggling to his knees. "You fucking hear me? You're dead, Marcelo. You think you can just—" Virgilio turned slowly. The gentleness evaporated from his expression like water on hot steel. "What did you just say?" The bar held its breath. Gray Shirt, fueled by humiliation and stupidity, pushed himself upright. His nose was clearly broken, his lip split, one eye already swelling shut. But pride, that toxic, murderous thing, made him take a step forward. "I said you're dead. You don't know who you're fucking with. We were sent here, paid to teach your little bitch a lesson. You think this is over? You think—" Virgilio moved like lightning. One moment, he was standing beside Clara. The next, his hand was wrapped around Gray Shirt's throat, lifting him off the ground with one arm. The bully's feet kicked uselessly at air, hands clawing at Virgilio's iron grip. "Sent," Virgilio repeated, voice deadly calm. "By whom?" Gray Shirt's face turned purple, his eyes bulged. "Fuck you." Virgilio's grip tightened. "Not enough to kill, not yet, but enough to make the man taste death. I'm going to ask one more time. And if you lie, or refuse to answer, I'm going to break every finger on both hands before I start on your ribs." "Sent by whom?" "Rios," Gray Shirt choked out. "Mateo Rios." The name landed like a grenade. The regulars at the bar exchanged glances. The bartender's face went pale. Even Clara, who knew nothing about this world, felt the shift, the way that single name changed the entire equation, from bar fight to something far more dangerous. Virgilio's expression didn't change, but his jaw clenched harder. "Mateo sent you," said to rough up the girl. "Send you a message." "What message?" That you can't protect everyone, that your reach has limits." Virgilio lowered the man slowly until his feet touched ground, but kept his hand wrapped around his throat. "Let me send Mateo a message in return," Virgilio said, voice barely above a whisper. "Tell him that his reach doesn't extend into my bar. Tell him that anyone who touches what's mine answers to me personally. Tell him that the next person he sends won't leave on their feet, they'll leave in pieces. Can you remember all that?" Gray Shirt nodded frantically, tears mixing with blood on his face. "Good." Virgilio released him. The man collapsed, gasping. "Now get out, all of you. And if I ever see your faces in my district again, there won't be a conversation. There won't be a warning. There will just be a closed casket." The 5 men scrambled for the door like broken animals. They limped, crawled, and dragged each other toward the exit, leaving trails of blood on the linoleum. Gray Shirt paused at the door, looked back with hatred and fear warring in his eyes, then disappeared into the night. The door swung shut. The bar remained silent. Virgilio stood in the center of the room, knuckles still bleeding, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then he turned back to Clara, and the hardness drained from his face again, replaced with something that looked almost like regret. "I'm sorry," he said. Clara blinked, confused. "What?" "That you had to see that it happened at all." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired, old, haunted. "You were supposed to be safe here." Clara stared at this man who'd just destroyed 5 people with his bare hands in less time than it took to finish a drink. This man who was apologizing to her. Something broke inside her chest, not painfully, but like ice cracking, like pressure releasing. Tears came again, but different ones. Not fear, not trauma, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to gratitude, to relief, to the overwhelming realization that someone had actually protected her. For the first time in 8 months, maybe in her entire life, someone had stood between her and violence instead of running away. "They were sent," she whispered. "Because of you. Because I work for you. Yes. And you still protected me." Virgilio's dark eyes met hers, and she saw the answer there before he spoke. I told you on your first day you're under my protection. That's not conditional. That's not negotiable. Anyone who hurts you answers to me. I don't care who sent them. I don't care what message they're trying to send. Nobody touches what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, should have sent every self-preservation instinct screaming. But instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on since leaving home. I'm scared, Clara admitted. You should be. This world is dangerous. Virgilio stepped closer, his voice gentling. But you're not alone in it anymore. I failed to protect someone once. I won't fail again. There was a story behind those words, pain and history and old wounds that hadn't healed. Clara could see it in the tension around his eyes, in the way his jaw worked like he was fighting memories. The bartender approached cautiously. Boss, should I call someone? Clean up? Call Miguel. Tell him we need the usual crew. Virgilio looked around at the destroyed furniture, the blood, the shattered glass. And get Clara some clean clothes. She's done for tonight. I can keep working, Clara protested weakly. No. The word was gentle but absolute. You're going upstairs to my office. You're going to sit down, drink water, and breathe. Then I'm taking you home. We're not done talking. And Clara, who'd spent 8 months trusting no one, followed him without question. Because the scariest man in the district had just proven he was the only one who'd actually fight for her. If your heart is pounding right now, don't just sit with that feeling, hit subscribe. Stories this intense take hours to create. One click is the least you can give. Virgilio's office smelled like leather, tobacco, and old secrets. Clara sat in the chair across from his desk, wrapped in an oversized black hoodie someone had fetched from the back. Her ruined uniform lay in a plastic bag by the door. Someone, maybe the bartender, had brought her water, aspirin, and a clean towel she'd used to wipe the beer from her face and hair. Her hands still shook. Every few seconds, her body would remember the impact, the feeling of flying, of hitting wood, of being utterly powerless, and she'd flinch involuntarily. Virgilio stood by the window, looking down at the street where his crew was loading the 5 men into a van. Not to hurt them further, though, Clara suspected that was an option, but to dump them in neutral territory with Virgilio's message still burning in their ears. He hadn't said anything for 5 minutes, just stood there, fists clenched, jaw working, radiating controlled fury that had nowhere left to go. Finally, Clara broke the silence. I'm sorry. Virgilio turned, confusion creasing his brow. What? I brought trouble to your bar. Those men came because of me, because I... Stop. The word was sharp, commanding. He crossed to his desk, sat on its edge facing her. You didn't bring trouble. Mateo Rios sent trouble because he's testing boundaries, because he wants to see if I'm still the man I was 5 years ago, or if I've gone soft. His eyes locked on hers. You were a target because you're vulnerable and visible. That's not your fault. But if I hadn't been here... If you hadn't been here, Mateo would have found another way to send his message. Burned a shipment. Hurt one of my people. Attacked a business I protect. Virgilio's voice softened slightly. This isn't about you, Clara. This is about me. About old debts and older grudges. Clara wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I don't understand this world. Your world. Good. That means you're still sane. A knock at the door interrupted them. Come in, Virgilio called. The bartender Miguel, Clara now remembered, entered carrying a small first aid kit. Boss, she's got glass in her hair. Probably some cuts that need cleaning. Virgilio nodded, took the kit. I'll handle it. Make sure the floor's cleaned up. And Miguel... His voice dropped lower. Spread the word. El Puente is locked down tomorrow night. Family only. We need to talk about Mateo. Miguel's expression darkened. You think he's making a move? I think he's testing. Which means we respond before it becomes an actual move. Miguel left, closing the door softly behind him. Virgilio opened the first aid kit, pulled out antiseptic wipes and tweezers. Turn around. Let me check your head. Clara hesitated, then obeyed. She felt his hands in her hair surprisingly gentle, carefully parting the strands to search for glass fragments. Each time he found one, he removed it with practiced precision. You've done this before, she said quietly. Too many times. He found another shard, placed it on a tissue. My sister used to get into fights when she was younger. Came home bloody more than once. I learned basic field medicine out of necessity. Clara's breath caught. You have a sister? Virgilio's hands paused for just a moment. Had. I still have one. Technically. She's alive. But she doesn't speak to me anymore. Why? The silence stretched long enough that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I failed to protect her when it mattered most. The pain in his voice was so raw, so unexpected, that Clara turned around despite his hands still being in her hair. She saw his face, the careful mask cracked, the haunted look in his eyes, the guilt carved so deep it had become part of his bone structure. What happened? She whispered. Virgilio lowered his hands, sat back against the desk. For a long moment, he stared at the wall, deciding whether to speak. Then, Isabella, 3 years younger than me, wanted to save the world, one patient at a time, worked at a free clinic in disputed territory. I told her it was dangerous, offered her protection. She refused, said she didn't want to live in my dark world. He laughed bitterly. She was right. My world destroys everything it touches. Virgilio. 7 years ago, she was attacked. 3 men, parking lot outside her clinic. They knew exactly who she was, used her to send me a message. His fists clenched until knuckles went white. By the time I got there, the ambulance had already arrived. She was alive, but broken, and she looked at me and asked, "Where were you?" Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. She understood now. Understood the gentleness beneath the brutality. Understood why he'd hired her so quickly, why he'd made such an absolute promise of protection. Understood why seeing her thrown on that table had unleashed something primal in him. She left 3 months later, moved across the country. Said she forgave me but couldn't be near me, that my world was toxic, that proximity to me destroyed lives. Virgilio's voice cracked slightly. She was right about that too. No. Clara's voice was firm. She was wrong. Virgilio looked at her, surprised. Your world is violent, yes. Dangerous, yes. But toxic? Clara shook her head. I've lived in toxic. I've survived men who hurt because they enjoy it, who destroy because they can. You're not that. You destroy to protect. You're violent because you have to be. There's a difference. Clara, tonight, 5 men threw me on a table. And you stopped them. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate profit or risk. You just protected me. Fresh tears came. Do you know how long it's been since someone actually fought for me instead of using me or hurting me? Virgilio's expression softened. Your sister was hurt, and you weren't there. That's tragedy, not failure. You can't be everywhere. You're not God. Clara's voice strengthened. But tonight? Tonight you were there. And I'm alive because of it. Safe because of it. Virgilio studied her face, this small woman who'd been brutalized twice in one lifetime but somehow still had the strength to offer him absolution he didn't think he deserved. I'm not a good man, Clara. Maybe not. But you're a good protector. And right now, that's all I need. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romantic, not yet. But fundamental. A recognition. An alliance. 2 broken people finding unexpected shelter in each other's damage. Virgilio cleared his throat, picked up the tweezers again. Turn back around. I'm not finished with your hair. Clara obeyed, smiling slightly through her tears. As his hands worked gently through her hair, removing the last fragments of violence, she whispered, "Thank you for being there tonight." Virgilio's hands paused briefly, then continued their careful work. "Always," he said quietly. "From now on, always." And for the first time in 8 months, Clara Reyes believed someone's promise. The van sat in an abandoned lot 3 blocks from El Puente Bar. Inside, the 5 men huddled against the metal walls, broken, bleeding, and finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. Gray Shirt's nose had stopped bleeding but sat crooked on his face. Black Shirt cradled his shattered wrist. The others nursed cracked ribs, split lips, and the kind of fear that permanently rewired survival instincts. Outside, 2 of Virgilio's men stood guard. Not to keep the bullies in, they were free to crawl away whenever they found the courage, but to ensure their conversation was private. Virgilio stepped into the van. The men flinched simultaneously, pressing themselves against the walls like animals cornered by a larger predator. He didn't blame them. He'd put that fear there intentionally. Fear was a teaching tool, and tonight's lesson needed to be carved deep enough to never fade. He sat on a crate near the door, deceptively casual. "Let's talk about Mateo Rios." Silence. The kind that reeked of terror and self-preservation. "I'm not going to hurt you," Virgilio said calmly. "Not anymore. But I need information, and you're going to give it to me. The only question is whether you do it easily or whether I make a phone call to people who specialize in extracting difficult answers." Gray Shirt broke first. "We already told you Mateo sent us. Paid us $2,000 each to rough up the girl. Said it would send you a message. What message specifically? That you can't protect everyone. That your territory has soft spots. Grayshirt's voice shook. That's all we know, I swear. We're just hired muscle. We don't know his plans. Virgilio studied him with the detached assessment of someone evaluating merchandise. You're telling me Mateo Rios, who runs the South Side, who's built his empire on careful strategy, sent 5 drunk idiots into my bar with no plan beyond rough up the girl? The men exchanged nervous glances. We weren't supposed to. Blackshirt started, then stopped. Finish that sentence. We weren't supposed to go that far. Just harass her, scare her, make her quit. Blackshirt's good hand trembled. But we were drinking, and she ignored us, and it felt like she was disrespecting us, so you escalated on your own? Virgilio's voice went colder. Mateo gave you an assignment, and you improvised. Made it personal. Grayshirt nodded miserably. We fucked up. We know we fucked up. We didn't know who she was to you. Didn't know the bar was yours. We're not from this district, we're from Riverside. Mateo hired us specifically because we didn't know the territory. That detail landed with weight. Virgilio leaned forward. Mateo hired outside muscle. Why? Said his own people were too recognizable. Wanted deniability. Grayshirt was talking faster now, desperate to be useful. He's testing you, man. Seeing if you're still connected, still dangerous. Said you've been quiet for years, maybe gone soft. He wanted to poke you, see if you'd bite back. And if I didn't, then he moves on your territory. Takes the protection contracts you hold. Absorbs your operations. Grayshirt's eyes pleaded for understanding. We're just pawns, Marcelo. We didn't know we were walking into a suicide mission. Virgilio sat back, processing. Mateo Rios. They'd had an understanding for 5 years, mutual respect built on mutually assured destruction. Mateo controlled the south side. Virgilio the north. Neither crossed the line. Neither tested boundaries. But understandings eroded over time, especially when one party started questioning whether the threat was still real. Virgilio had been quieter lately. Less visible. Fewer public demonstrations of power. He'd been building legitimate businesses, diversifying income, trying to create something that wouldn't collapse when he inevitably got too old or too slow. Apparently, Mateo had interpreted quiet growth as weakness. Here's what's going to happen, Virgilio said, standing. You're going to deliver my message to Mateo exactly as I give it to you. No additions, no interpretations, word for word. Understood? 5 heads nodded frantically. Tell Mateo that his test failed. Tell him that I am exactly as dangerous as I was 5 years ago, more, actually, because now I have something worth protecting. Virgilio's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tell him that the girl he targeted isn't some random waitress. She's under my personal protection, and anyone who touches her doesn't just answer to Virgilio Marcelo, the businessman, they answer to Virgilio Marcelo, the man who will burn entire operations to ash over matters of principle. Grayshirt swallowed hard. He's going to what? Virgilio's eyes locked on him. Retaliate? Escalate? Good. I welcome it. Because this quiet détente we've maintained? It was making me soft, making me complacent. Mateo just reminded me why people used to fear the Marcelo name. Tell him I said thank you for that. The temperature in the van seemed to drop. Tell him that El Puente Bar is sovereign territory. Tell him that anyone who crosses that threshold with hostile intent will leave in pieces if they leave at all. Tell him that the next people he sends won't get a warning. They won't get a conversation. They'll just disappear. Virgilio walked to the door, paused. And tell him one more thing. If Clara Reyes so much as trips on a sidewalk, if she gets a parking ticket, if someone looks at her wrong on the street, I will assume it's connected to him, and I will respond accordingly. His businesses, his people, his family, everything he's built becomes fair game. The silence in the van was absolute. Now get out of my district. You have 2 hours before I change my mind about letting you live. The 5 men scrambled out like the van was on fire. Virgilio watched them limp into the darkness, carrying his message like a virus they'd been infected with. They'd deliver it. Fear guaranteed that. And Mateo? Mateo would make a choice, back down or escalate. Either way, Virgilio was done being quiet. He pulled out his phone, dialed. Miguel answered on the first ring. Boss? Call everyone. Family meeting tomorrow night. We're going to war if necessary. Virgilio looked back toward El Puente Bar, where Clara sat in his office, finally safe. And Miguel? Find out everything about Mateo's operations, shipments, warehouses, Weak points. If he wants to test my reach, let's show him exactly how far it extends. Copy that, boss. Virgilio ended the call, stared at the city lights. 7 years ago, he'd failed Isabella. Tonight, he'd saved Clara. And he'd be damned if he'd let history steal another person he'd promised to protect. Even if it meant becoming the monster Isabella feared again. Because some promises were worth any price. The drive to Clara's shelter was silent. Virgilio's black SUV moved through empty streets. Neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked asphalt. Clara sat in the passenger seat, still wrapped in his oversized hoodie, watching the city blur past her window. Every pothole they hit made her wince her ribs, remembered the table's edge. Her muscles remembered the impact. But worse than the physical pain was the realization settling in her chest like lead. She'd brought a war to the only man who'd tried to help her. "You're thinking too loud," Virgilio said quietly, eyes on the road. "I should leave." Clara's voice was barely audible. "Disappear. If I'm gone, Matteo has no reason to." "No." The word was absolute, non-negotiable. "But—" "No, Clara." Virgilio's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Running doesn't solve this. Matteo isn't targeting you specifically, he's targeting my weakness. If you disappear, he'll just find another pressure point. Another person. Running only teaches him the strategy works." Clara turned to face him. "So what? I stay and become the reason people die? Become the excuse for a war? You stay because you're under my protection, and I don't break my promises." Virgilio's jaw clenched. "And if there's a war, it's because Matteo chose to challenge me, not because you exist." They pulled up outside the shelter, a squat brick building with bars on the windows, and a flickering sign that read, "Street, Catherine's Women's Refuge." The sight of it made something twist in Virgilio's chest. This is where Clara had been living. This is what safe had looked like before him. He turned off the engine. "How long have you been staying here?" 2 months. Since I arrived in the city." "And before that?" Clara hesitated. Then something broke inside her, the dam she'd been holding back since the moment she fled her hometown. The truth came spilling out like blood from a wound finally opened. "I'm running from a debt I can't pay." Virgilio listened without interrupting as she told him everything. Her mother's death. Her father's gambling. The $15,000 inherited like original sin. The men who came collecting cartel enforcers who didn't accept "I don't have it" as an answer. "They gave me options," Clara whispered, voice shaking. "Pay in cash, or pay in other ways. Work in their clubs, their houses, be useful until the debt was cleared." Tears streamed down her face. "So I ran. Crossed the border with fake papers. Been moving city to city for 8 months, working under the table, sleeping in shelters, trying to stay invisible." "But you can't stay invisible forever," Virgilio said gently. "No. Eventually they'll find me. They always do." Clara wiped her eyes. "That's why I can't let you fight for me. I'm already dead, I'm just delaying it. And I won't let you become collateral damage in my ending." Virgilio was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet. From it, he extracted a business card, plain white, single phone number embossed in black. "This is my personal line, not the bar's, mine." He pressed it into her palm. "You call this number day or night, and I answer, period. Virgilio." "I'm not finished." His dark eyes locked on hers. $15,000. "That's what you owe?" Clara nodded, confused. "Consider it paid." Her breath stopped. "What?" "Your debt. I'm buying it. I'll contact the people you're running from. Negotiate the transfer. They get their money, you get your freedom." You can't just, that's $15,000. I've spent more on a single shipment of whiskey." Virgilio's voice was matter-of-fact. "Money is a tool, Clara. Right now, I'm using it to remove the leash around your neck." Clara's hands shook. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" "Because you remind me of my sister. Because I failed once and refused to fail again. Because in 7 years of violence and business, you're the first person who looked at me and saw something worth saving instead of something to fear." But Virgilio didn't say any of that. Instead, "Because you work for me. Because you're under my protection. Because that's what protection means, removing threats, not just responding to them." He paused. "And because you deserve a chance to live without looking over your shoulder." Tears came harder now. "I don't know how to repay." "You don't repay protection, Clara. You accept it. You trust it. And when you're ready, when you're safe and whole again, you pay it forward. Help someone else who needs it." Virgilio's expression softened. "That's how this works." Clara covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that were equal parts relief and disbelief. 8 months of running, 8 months of fear, 8 months of believing she'd die with that debt carved into her tombstone. And this man, this violent, dangerous, complicated man, was offering her freedom. "There's one condition," Virgilio said quietly. Clara looked up, waiting. "You don't stay here anymore. This place." He gestured at the shelter. "It's not safe enough. Not with Matteo testing boundaries. Not with people who might come looking for you. Where else can I? I own an apartment building 6 blocks from El Puente. Small units, secure building, good neighborhood." Virgilio pulled out another card, this one with an address. "Unit 4B is vacant. It's yours, furnished, utilities included, no rent." "Virgilio, that's too much." "It's practical. You're close to work, I can ensure your safety, and you have actual privacy." His tone left no room for argument. "You move in tomorrow. Miguel will help with your things, whatever you need." Clara stared at the card, at this man who'd walked into her life 3 days ago and was systematically dismantling every wall she'd built to survive. "Why are you doing all this?" she whispered. "Really?" Virgilio met her eyes, and for the first time, his careful mask cracked completely. She saw the guilt, the grief, the desperate need to rewrite a history that couldn't be changed. "Because someone should have done it for my sister. Because someone should have stepped in before she was hurt. Because I wasn't there then." His voice caught. "But I'm here now, and I won't fail again." Clara reached across the console and took his hand. Not romantically, not seductively, just human connection, one broken person acknowledging another's pain and saying without words, "I see you. I understand. You're not alone in your guilt. Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for fighting, for caring." Virgilio's hand tightened around hers. "Pack your things tomorrow morning. Miguel will pick you up at 10. You're not sleeping in a shelter ever again." Clara nodded, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found shelter that wasn't temporary. As she stepped out of the SUV, Virgilio called after her. "Clara?" She turned back. "You're safe now. Really safe. I promise you that." And standing in the rain, wrapped in his hoodie, with his card clutched in her hand, Clara Reyes finally let herself believe that promises weren't always lies, that some men actually kept them. Mateo Rios received Virgilio's message at 3 in the morning. Not through a phone call, those could be traced. Not through an intermediary, those could be unreliable. But through the 5 broken men who limped into his Southside warehouse, bleeding and terrified, carrying words that landed like grenades. Mateo sat in his office, expensive leather chair, imported cigar, tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and listened to gray shirt stammer through Virgilio's response. With each word, his expression darkened. By the end, his cigar had burned down to ash between his fingers. He said, "What about his reach?" Mateo's voice was dangerously quiet. That it extends farther than you think. That anyone who touches the girl answers to him personally." Gray Shirt's voice shook. "That if anything happens to her, anything at all, he assumes you're responsible, and he'll respond accordingly." Mateo stood slowly, walked to the window overlooking his territory. Warehouses, clubs, protection contracts stretching 15 blocks. An empire built over a decade of careful strategy and calculated violence. And Virgilio Marcelo was threatening all of it over a waitress. "Tell me exactly how he moved," Mateo said. "When he fought you. Details." Black Shirt wrist, now in a makeshift splint, spoke up. "Fast, efficient, no wasted movement. Took all 5 of us down in maybe 15 seconds. Wasn't even breathing hard afterward." "Did he seem rusty? Out of practice?" "No, boss. He seemed controlled. Like he was holding back." That was the detail that mattered. Virgilio hadn't unleashed everything, he'd calibrated his response precisely. Enough violence to send a message, enough restraint to prove he was still in control. That wasn't a man gone soft. That was a predator reminding everyone why they'd feared him in the first place. Mateo's jaw clenched. 5 years ago, when they'd established their détente, Virgilio had been at his peak, ruthless, visible, willing to burn entire operations over matters of principle. Then he'd gone quiet, stopped making public displays, focused on legitimate businesses. Mateo had interpreted that as weakness, as Virgilio trying to go legitimate, to wash the blood off his hands and pretend he was something other than a criminal. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Virgilio hadn't gone weak, he'd gone strategic, built infrastructure, diversified, became harder to attack because his power wasn't concentrated in visible displays anymore. And now Mateo had poked him, reminded him of what he was, given him a reason to stop pretending. "Get out," Mateo told the 5 men. "And if I ever see your faces again, I'll finish what Marcelo started." They fled gratefully. Alone in his office, Mateo made calculations. He could back down, accept that the test had failed, return to the détente, let this fade into forgotten history. Or he could escalate, double down, prove that Virgilio's protection wasn't absolute, that his reach had limits, that the Rios organization wasn't intimidated by threats. Pride demanded escalation. Strategy demanded retreat. Mateo crushed his cigar in the ashtray, grabbed his phone, and made a call. "It's me. I need information on Virgilio Marcelo's operations. Everything. Shipments, properties, personnel, weak points." He paused. "And find out everything about the girl, Clara Reyes, where she came from, what she's running from, who wants her dead. Because if Virgilio cared that much about one waitress, she was leverage, and leverage was power." 2 days later, Virgilio received a package. No return address, no note, just a manila envelope delivered to El Puente Bar during the dinner rush. Inside, photographs of Clara, walking to work, sitting in a cafe, entering her new apartment building, time stamped from the past 48 hours. And underneath the photos, a single typed sentence. "Protection has limits. How many people can you watch at once?" Virgilio's hands crushed the envelope. His jaw locked. His eyes went dead and cold. Miguel, standing nearby, saw the change. "Boss? Boss. Call everyone. Now. Full mobilization." "What happened?" Virgilio showed him the photos. Miguel's face went pale. "He's threatening her. After I warned him. After I made it explicitly clear what would happen." Virgilio's voice was eerily calm, the quiet before a hurricane. "Mateo just chose war. What do you want us to do?" "Find out where he is. Tonight. Right now." Virgilio stood, rolling his sleeves up to reveal his tattooed forearms. "And get Clara somewhere secure. Full protection detail. She doesn't leave their sight." "Where are you going?" "To remind Mateo Rios why people used to pray I'd never learn their names." Mateo's warehouse was in neutral territory technically, a gray area between South and North, where neither organization claimed explicit control. A place for meetings, negotiations, and business that needed to happen away from surveillance. Virgilio arrived at midnight with 8 of his most trusted people. No guns this close to neutral ground. Firearms would trigger too much attention. But knives, bats, chains, tools that made statements without making headlines. The warehouse doors were locked. Virgilio didn't knock. He kicked them open, hinges screaming, metal crashing against concrete. Inside, Mateo stood surrounded by a dozen of his own people, all armed, all ready. He'd been expecting this, planning for it. "Virgilio," Mateo's voice echoed in the empty space. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You sent pictures of Clara." Virgilio walked forward, his people fanning out behind him. "After I explicitly warned you what would happen if she was targeted again. I sent information, a reminder that your protection isn't absolute." Mateo smiled coldly. "How many people can you actually watch?" "Virgilio, how thin can you spread before something breaks?" "Let's find out." Virgilio moved. His people surged forward simultaneously. Mateo's crew met them in the middle, and the warehouse erupted into controlled chaos. But Virgilio didn't join the brawl. He walked straight through it, past the fighting, his eyes locked on Mateo like a missile locked on target. Mateo's smile faltered. "You think I'm here to negotiate?" Virgilio's voice cut through the noise. "You think this is a conversation?" He closed the distance in 3 strides, grabbed Mateo by his expensive suit jacket, and slammed him against a support beam hard enough to crack ribs. "I gave you a chance to back down. You chose this." Mateo tried to fight back, threw a punch that Virgilio caught mid-swing, redirected, and used to slam Mateo's hand against the metal beam. Bones cracked. Mateo screamed. "You threatened her." "After I told you what she means." Virgilio's other hand went to Mateo's throat. "You sent pictures like you were in control, like you had power here." He squeezed. Not enough to kill, enough to make Mateo understand how easily he could. "Let me clarify something," Virgilio whispered, his face inches from Mateo's. "Clara Reyes is not leverage. She's not a pressure point. She's the line you don't cross, and you just crossed it." Around them, the fighting had stopped. Mateo's people stood frozen, watching their boss get choked against a beam by a man who looked utterly calm while doing it. "Here's what happens next," Virgilio continued. "You pull every single person you have out of my territory. You stop watching Clara. You forget she exists. You pretend this entire thing never happened. And if I don't? Matteo choked out. Virgilio leaned closer, voice dropping to barely audible. Then I stop being strategic. I stop being careful. I burn every single thing you've built until there's nothing left but ash and memory. Your warehouses, your clubs, your contracts, your people. His grip tightened. And then I come for your family, your sister in Miami, your mother in the retirement home. Everyone you've ever cared about learns what it feels like to be leverage. Matteo's eyes went wide with genuine terror. You wanted to test my reach? Congratulations. You just found out it extends into places you didn't know I could touch. Virgilio released him, let him collapse, gasping to the floor. This is your only warning. The next time I hear your name connected to Clara's, I don't send messages. I don't make threats. I just erase you. He turned and walked away, his people falling in behind him. At the door, he paused, looked back at Matteo, still crumpled on the ground. The debt is paid, Matteo. In fear, in understanding, in knowing you're alive right now, only because I chose mercy. Virgilio's eyes were empty, cold, final. Don't make me regret that choice. The warehouse doors slammed shut behind him, and Matteo Rios, criminal kingpin of the South Side, sat in the wreckage of his pride and made the smartest decision of his life. He backed down. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through actual curtains in an actual bedroom that was actually hers. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented. The shelter had shared rooms, thin mattresses, the constant sound of other women's breathing and nightmares. But this was quiet, private, safe. Her new apartment was small but furnished with care. A real bed with clean sheets, a couch that didn't sag, a kitchen with working appliances. Simple things that felt like luxury after 8 months of survival mode. On the counter, she found a note in bold handwriting. Took care of the problem. You're safe now. Really safe. V. Clara read it 3 times, hands shaking, before she allowed herself to believe it. A knock at the door made her jump. She looked through the peephole. Virgilio stood there, holding 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled like fresh pastries. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, but his eyes held something that looked almost like peace. Clara opened the door. You didn't have to. I wanted to check on you. He handed her a coffee. And Miguel told me you haven't eaten since yesterday. They sat on her new couch, still stiff from being unused, and for a few minutes, neither spoke, just drank coffee and existed in the comfortable silence of people who'd survived something together. Finally, Clara broke it. What did you do? What needed to be done? Virgilio. Matteo backed down. His voice was matter of fact. He pulled his people out of the territory. Stopped the surveillance. He won't bother you again. Clara studied his face, the bruised knuckles, the tension in his jaw, the weight in his eyes that came from doing violence to protect someone. Did you kill anyone? No. But I made sure he understood the cost of continuing. Virgilio met her gaze. Your debt to your hometown? I contacted them through intermediaries. 15,000 transferred this morning. You're clear. Tears came instantly. Virgilio, I can't just... Yes, you can. The money's gone. The debt's paid. You're free, Clara. He set down his coffee, turned to face her fully. No one is looking for you anymore. No one is coming. You can stop running. The words hit her like a physical thing. Stop running. Words she'd convinced herself she'd never hear. Freedom she'd convinced herself she'd never deserve. Why? Her voice broke. Why do all this for me? I'm nobody. Just a waitress who showed up desperate and... You're not nobody. Virgilio's voice was fierce. You're someone who survived 8 months of hell and kept your humanity. Someone who worked hard and asked for nothing. Someone who looked at the scariest man in the district and saw something worth saving instead of something to fear. He paused, jaw working. And you're someone who reminds me that protection isn't just about violence. It's about giving people a chance to be more than their worst circumstances. Clara wiped her eyes, mascara smudging. Your sister would be proud of you. For this. For me. Virgilio's expression cracked. Isabella would say I'm still living in my dark world, that I just found a better reason to be violent. Maybe. But she'd also see that you're using that world to protect instead of destroy. Clara reached for his hand. That matters. You matter. For a long moment, Virgilio just looked at their joined hands. Then, work tonight? Clara nodded. If you still want me at the bar. Clara, you're not just an employee. His voice softened. Your family. El Puente is your home as much as it is mine, and family doesn't get fired for being targeted by idiots with delusions of power. Family. The word landed in Clara's chest like a seed in fertile soil, something that could grow, that could take root, that could become shelter. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now? Virgilio stood, offered his hand to help her up. Now you live. Really live. Find out who Clara Reyes is when she's not running, not scared, not counting down to some inevitable tragedy. And you? I keep my promise. I stay vigilant. I make sure no one ever hurts you again. He smiled slightly, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. And maybe I figure out what Virgilio Marcello is when he's not failing his sister, when he's actually succeeding at protection. Clara threw her arms around him. The hug surprised both of them, spontaneous, emotional, the kind of connection that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. Virgilio stiffened for a moment, then slowly, carefully wrapped his arms around her small frame. Thank you, she whispered into his shoulder. For saving me, for fighting, for caring when no one else did. Always, he said quietly. From now on, always. They stood there in her new apartment, this broken man and this surviving woman. Two people who'd found unexpected shelter in each other's damage, and for the first time in years, both felt something dangerous. Hope. That night, El Puente Bar buzzed with familiar energy. Clara worked the floor in her uniform, carrying drinks and taking orders like the past week hadn't happened. But everything had changed. The regulars nodded to her with respect. Miguel checked on her every hour. And in the back office, Virgilio watched through the security cameras, with the vigilance of someone who'd learned that promises meant action, not just words. At one point, a drunk customer got too close, grabbed Clara's arm. Before she could react, 3 regulars stood up simultaneously. The message was clear. She was protected. Not just by Virgilio, by everyone. The drunk apologized immediately and left. Clara caught Virgilio's eye through the office door window. He nodded once, a silent confirmation that she was safe, that the entire bar was now her shield. At closing time, as Clara wiped down tables, she paused at the one where it had all started, the table where she'd been thrown, where her nightmare had peaked, where Virgilio had proven that some men actually fight for what they protect instead of just claiming ownership. The wood had been replaced, the damage erased, but the memory remained. Not as trauma, as transformation. Clara looked at that table and whispered to herself, I'm not afraid anymore. In his office, Virgilio made a phone call. Isabella, it's me. I know you said not to call, but I needed to tell you something. He paused, gathering words. I saved someone, really saved them, the way I should have saved you. Silence on the other end. Then, tell me about her. And for the first time in 7 years, Virgilio Marcello talked to his sister about hope instead of guilt. They tried to break the girl. Instead, they awakened the man who would destroy anyone who dared touch her. And in El Puente Bar, where neon lights hummed and secrets lived in shadows, everyone remembered the night the bullies learned who truly runs the darkness. Clara Reyes learned something too, that sometimes salvation comes wrapped in tattoos and violence, that sometimes monsters protect better than angels, and that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to fight for you when the whole world walks away. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.